Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. Look, if you're going to attend the most prestigious military academy in the known galaxy, you'd better believe they're going to test you in ways that make your brain hurt. And if you're human, well, congratulations. You've just entered a classroom where everyone else has natural armor, venom sacs, or the ability to breathe fire. And you showed up with opposable thumbs and a concerning amount of historical baggage. Welcome to the Galactic Combat Academy, Station Prometheus 9. The station itself hung in the void like a massive steel flower. Its petals actually gun emplacements, because apparently even educational institutions needed enough firepower to crack a moon. Subtle. Inside, the corridors gleamed with that particular shine that screamed military discipline. And the air recyclers hummed with the efficiency of a civilization that had solved faster-than-light travel, but still couldn't make a quiet ventilation system. Classroom 12C was standard issue for the Academy, which meant it looked like someone had designed it specifically to make you feel small and inadequate. High ceilings, holographic displays covering 3 walls, and seating arrangements that accommodated everything from two-legged humanoids to the gelatinous Plorathians who needed specialized containment fields just to maintain a consistent shape during lectures. On this particular Wednesday morning, the room was packed. Cadet Owen sat in the 3rd row, looking for all the world like someone who'd rather be literally anywhere else. Mid-20s, average height for a human, with the kind of perpetually tired expression that suggested he'd discovered the secret to running on coffee and spite. His uniform was regulation perfect, because the one thing the Academy didn't tolerate was wrinkled fabric. But his posture suggested a man who'd mastered the art of appearing attentive while mentally being 3-star systems away. Around him sat the cream of the galactic crop, and oh, what a crop it was! To his left, Cadet Silandra loomed like a scaled mountain. Silthar warriors didn't do anything by halves, and at 3 meters of reptilian muscle, razor-sharp teeth, and a tail that could punch through steel plating, she was the physical embodiment of "don't start none, won't be none." Her species had conquered their home system through sheer aggressive expansion, and she carried that heritage like a badge of honor. Right now, she was sharpening her claws on a piece of synthetic bone, the scraping sound making several nearby cadets wince. Behind Owen, Cadet Nofarel had arranged his tentacles in what passed for a comfortable position among the Quellan people. His species thought in mathematical probabilities and tactical algorithms the way humans thought in curse words and movie quotes. Every one of his 8 tentacles held a different data pad, all displaying complex Janju scenarios, and his 3-eye stalks were independently reading different screens. Multitasking as a biological imperative. Terrifying, really. And in the back corner, taking up roughly twice the space of anyone else, sat Cadet Grombash. Morgathi physiology was essentially what happened when evolution decided rocks needed attitude problems. Stone-gray skin that could deflect small arms fire, fists like sledgehammers, and a cultural philosophy that boiled down to hit it until it stops moving, then hit it some more for good measure. He was currently arm wrestling himself, because apparently even his own limbs needed to prove dominance. At the front of the classroom, Instructor Ralmoth clicked his mandibles in the particular pattern that meant he was about to ruin someone's day. Ralmoth was Anthrak, which meant 6 arms, compound eyes that could track a fly on Jupiter while reading a book on Saturn, and an exoskeleton that gleamed with military decorations like a walking trophy case. He'd seen combat on 18 different worlds, survived things that would make a horror novelist weep, and had precisely zero patience for what he called substandard tactical thinking. "Cadets," he began, his voice resonating through the translator implants everyone wore. "Today, you face the annual tactical assessment. This examination has broken the spirits of warriors far greater than you. It has sent decorated veterans into early retirement. It has made generals weep." He paused for dramatic effect. Instructor Ralmoth loved dramatic effect, the way humans loved breathing. "Some of you will pass. Most of you will fail. And a select few." His compound eyes swept the room with the cold efficiency of a predator selecting prey, "will fail so spectacularly that we'll use your attempts as examples of what not to do for the next decade." Encouraging. Really boosted morale. The holographic displays flickered to life, each cadet's station illuminating with the exam questions. Standard format, 20 questions ranging from basic tactical theory to complex multi-system strategic planning. The kind of test that separated the merely competent from the genuinely dangerous. Owen glanced at his screen with the enthusiasm of someone checking their bank account after a weekend in Vegas. Questions 1 through 11 were fine, whatever, standard stuff. Identify the weakness in this formation. Calculate optimal firing solutions for these trajectories. Explain the doctrine of overwhelming response in 50 words or less. Then came question 12. List 3 methods to neutralize a fortified enemy position with limited resources. Be specific. Owen read it once, twice. Tilted his head like a confused puppy. 3 methods? Just 3? Around him, the other cadets were already writing. Silandra's claws clicked against her datapad with confident precision. Nofrel's tentacles flew across multiple screens simultaneously, probability matrices cascading in beautiful mathematical precision. Even Grombash, who approached most problems with the tactical sophistication of a brick through a window, was jotting down what probably amounted to "punch it really hard" in increasingly elaborate ways. Instructor Ralmoth stalked between the rows, his 6 arms clasped behind his back, in a pose that suggested he was already disappointed in all of them. "Question 12 has historically been the breaking point for lesser species," he announced, his voice dripping with that special condescension that only career military instructors could achieve. "It requires creative thinking, tactical innovation, and the ability to adapt limited resources into effective solutions. Qualities that, I must note, are sadly lacking in many of this cycle's cadets." His compound eyes lingered on the human section of the classroom, because of course they did. Humans had only been part of the galactic community for about 60 years, which in cosmic terms was approximately 5 minutes ago. They'd arrived with slower-than-light ships, chemical rockets, and the kind of adorable optimism that suggested they thought the galaxy was going to be one big friendly neighborhood potluck. Reality had been educational. The thing was, humans didn't look impressive. No natural armor, no venom, no ability to breathe in vacuum or see in 14 different spectrum ranges. They were just there, being all soft and squishy, and improbably stubborn about it. Instructor Ralmoth had made his opinion on human tactical capability very clear over the past months. Specifically, his opinion was that humans had the strategic sophistication of a particularly dim-witted fungus, and he'd said as much repeatedly in lectures that could charitably be described as character building, and more accurately described as systematic humiliation. Owen had listened to these lectures with the same expression he wore now, vaguely attentive and mildly sleepy, like someone waiting for a bus that was perpetually 5 minutes away. But now, staring at question 12, something shifted behind his eyes. 3 methods, limited resources. Be specific. His fingers started moving across the data pad. Slowly at first, then faster. The soft clicking of stylus on screen became a steady rhythm, a percussion of tactical planning. 10 minutes passed. The other cadets began finishing, transmitting their answers with varying degrees of confidence. Silandra stretched, satisfied with her 3 methods, all of which probably involved her claws and someone else's internal organs. Nofarel reviewed his work with mathematical precision, nodded once, and submitted. Grombash grunted, pressed submit like he was declaring war on the button, and folded his massive arms. Owen kept writing. 15 minutes. 20, Instructor Ralmoth noticed. Of course he noticed. His compound eyes could track individual dust motes in a sandstorm. He drifted over to Owen's station, all 6 arms still clasped behind his back, mandibles clicking with amusement. "Cadet Owen," he said, loud enough for the whole class to hear, "are you perhaps having difficulty understanding the question? It asks for 3 methods. THREE, a quantity I'm certain even humans can count to." A few scattered laughs from the other cadets. Silandra's definitely included, because she enjoyed a good humiliation as much as the next apex predator. Owen didn't look up. His stylus kept moving. "Understood, Instructor. 3 methods. Got it." But he didn't stop writing. Ralmoth's amusement began to curdle into confusion. He leaned closer, his compound eyes focusing on Owen's screen, and that's when his mandibles stopped clicking. The answer sheet was on its 2nd page. Owen had written methods 1, 2, and 3, standard stuff. Flanking maneuvers using terrain advantages, supply line interdiction with minimal force projection, and psychological warfare through targeted information campaigns. Solid answers. Textbook even. But then he'd kept going. Method 4. Infrastructure sabotage using readily available civilian technology. Method 5. Acoustic warfare utilizing resonance frequencies specific to common fortification materials. Method 6. Biological vector deployment through indigenous fauna manipulation. Instructor Ralmoth's primary eyes widened. His secondary eyes widened. His tertiary eyes, the ones he usually kept closed because they were sensitive to bright light, opened and widened too. Owen was still writing. The classroom had gone quiet. That particular silence that happens when everyone realizes something interesting is unfolding and they don't want to miss it. Cadets were craning necks, extending eye stalks, and in Nofarel's case, stretching tentacles to see what had frozen their normally unflappable instructor. Silandra's tail stopped mid-swish. Is the human still writing?" "Affirmative," Nofarel confirmed, because Quellens couldn't resist stating obvious facts. Current page count, 3. Probability of instructor cardiac event, increasing. Owen's stylus continued its steady rhythm, and if you listened carefully, really carefully, you could almost hear the sound of an instructor's worldview beginning to crack. Method 8 was coming, and Instructor Ralmoth was about to have a very bad day. Method 8 began innocently enough. Well, innocently, in the way that a tiger begins innocently enough as a cute kitten before growing into something that can bite your face off. Owen's stylus moved with the steady confidence of someone who'd thought about this particular problem before, probably while doing something completely mundane, like grocery shopping or folding laundry. Instructor Ralmoth leaned closer, all 6 of his arms now unconsciously unclasping, 2 of them bracing against Owen's desk as his compound eyes tracked each word appearing on the screen. Method 8, Owen had typed, with helpful bold formatting, biological warfare through indigenous fauna manipulation and accelerated population dynamics. Ralmoth's mandibles went very still. The description continued, and oh boy, did it continue. Owen had broken it down into subsections because, apparently, when humans decided to explain how to weaponize an ecosystem, they liked to be thorough about it. Step 1. Identify native species with rapid reproduction cycles and minimal natural predators within the target zone. Preference for species with disease vector potential or agricultural impact capacity. Okay, slightly concerning, but still theoretical, right? Step 2. Introduce nutritional supplements to target species population using fortification drop points disguised as natural food sources. Optimal supplement composition. High protein concentrate. Vitamin enhancement. Mineral supplementation to accelerate growth and fertility rates. Ralmoth's breathing slits flared, the anthracite equivalent of hyperventilating. Step 3. Monitor population explosion over 2 to 6 week period, depending on species generation time. Expected growth rate, exponential, potentially reaching critical mass within 1 standard month. It kept going. Owen had included contingency plans for different atmospheric compositions, gravitational variations, and even footnotes about which Earth species had served as successful templates for this approach. Footnotes. The human had added academic citations to his murder exam. Step 4. Once population reaches critical density, introduce secondary species, natural predator to primary target, creating competition pressure that drives both populations toward the fortified position seeking resources. Step 5, and this is where Ralmoth's primary eyes started twitching. Contaminate position's external resources with pheromone markers that identify the location as optimal breeding ground for both species. Result: sustained biological siege with zero ongoing resource investment. The instructor's exoskeleton had gone from its usual healthy gleam to a sort of sickly pale color that suggested his circulatory system was having second thoughts about this whole consciousness thing. Contingencies, Owen had added, because of course he had, include atmospheric seeding for airborne species variants, aquatic deployment for coastal positions, and fungal spore distribution for underground facilities. Estimated casualty rate. Variable, depending on target species' immune system compatibility. Estimated position abandonment timeline, 2 to 8 weeks. Resource investment, minimal. Ethical considerations, significant. That last line, ethical considerations, significant, was somehow the most disturbing part. It suggested Owen had thought about the ethics and then written the method anyway. Instructor Ralmoth straightened up, all 6 arms trembling slightly. Around the classroom, other cadets had noticed his distress. Silandra's reptilian features, usually locked in an expression of aggressive confidence, had shifted to something resembling concern. Nofrel had stopped reading his multiple data pads, all 8 tentacles frozen mid-gesture, which, for a Kellen, was the equivalent of a human's jaw hitting the floor. "Cadet!" Ralmoth's voice came out as a rasp, his translator struggling with whatever sound his species made when confronting existential horror. "This is you! Where did you—" "Oh." Owen looked up, blinking like someone who'd just been interrupted from solving a crossword puzzle. "Method 8? Yeah, that's based on what my family used to do with locusts back on the farm. Well, sort of. We were trying to get rid of them, but the principle's the same, just, scaled up, and weaponized, and pointed at people instead of crops. Farm. He'd learned this on a farm. Instructor Ralmoth opened his mouth to respond, closed it, opened it again, and then made the wise decision to just keep reading, because surely it couldn't get worse. Narrator's note: it absolutely got worse. Method 9. sonic resonance structural collapse using frequency modulation. Owen had apparently decided that biological warfare was just the warm-up act. Method 9 included mathematical formulas, the kind that made Noferel's tentacles start twitching with involuntary interest. Owen had calculated resonance frequencies for common fortification materials, cross-referenced them with improvised sound generation equipment, and included a helpful diagram showing optimal speaker placement for maximum structural stress. The principle, Owen had written, is similar to shattering glass with sustained high-frequency sound, except applied to Durasteel support beams. Required equipment: 12 to 20 high-output speakers, frequency generator, and approximately 6 hours of sustained operation. The resulting harmonic vibration creates microscopic stress fractures that compound geometrically until structural integrity failure. He'd tested this. Somehow, somewhere, Owen had tested this theory. The level of detail suggested empirical evidence. Method 10 made Instructor Ralmoth's secondary eyes close involuntarily. Chemical contamination of water supplies using common cleaning agents and industrial byproducts. What followed was essentially a chemistry lesson disguised as a war crime. Owen had listed household chemicals, their molecular structures, interaction effects when combined, and the resulting compound's impact on biological systems. He'd included solubility rates, dilution calculations, and even noted which combinations were odorless and colorless for maximum penetration before detection. This method, Owen had helpfully noted, is historically effective but morally reprehensible. Estimated detection time: 6 to 18 hours post-contamination. Estimated incapacitation rate: 80 to 90%. Antidote availability: depends on specific compound mixture. Recommend only for scenarios where all other options exhausted. The fact that he'd included a moral disclaimer made it somehow worse, like adding "no offense" before saying something incredibly offensive. Silandra had abandoned all pretense of not staring. Her 3-meter frame had shifted to get a better view of Owen's screen, her predatory instincts clearly torn between respect and revulsion. "The human is still writing," she hissed, her voice carrying that particular tone that suggested she was reassessing every interaction she'd ever had with the species. Grombash, from the back of the room, rumbled something in his native language that the translators rendered as, "This is not honorable combat," but with undertones suggesting he was also taking mental notes. Owen, oblivious to the growing crisis surrounding him, continued typing. Method 11. Social engineering for internal rebellion and command structure collapse. This one was pure psychology. No bombs or bioweapons required. Owen had outlined a step-by-step process for identifying fracture points in enemy morale, exploiting existing grievances, and using targeted propaganda to turn a fortified position's defenders against their own leadership. He'd included sample messaging, distribution methods, and even psychological profiles for different personality types to target. Key principle, he'd written, is to make the defenders believe that surrender or rebellion is their own idea. Time investment: high. Resource investment: low. Success rate: variable but historically significant. Examples from human history: approximately 83 documented cases with 72% average success rate. 83 cases. Humans had done this 83 times that were documented. The undocumented number was probably terrifying. Method 12. Electromagnetic pulse deployment, using improvised components and standard civilian technology. Noferel made a sound that his translator couldn't quite process, something between a gasp and a mathematical proof reaching its conclusion. Owen had reverse-engineered an EMP device using parts that were available at any standard commercial technology outlet. The parts list read like a shopping trip to an electronics store, but the assembly instructions read like a doctoral thesis in applied physics. Effective range, Owen noted, approximately 200 meters. All electronic systems within range experience catastrophic failure. Biological impact, minimal to none. Infrastructure damage, complete. Recovery time for affected systems, permanent. Estimated construction time, 4 to 6 hours with proper tools. Method 13 made everyone in the classroom uncomfortable, including Owen, apparently, because he'd prefaced it with, "Warning, extreme biological hazard. Fungal spore deployment for sustained area denial." The description that followed involved genetic modification of common mold species, aerosolization techniques, and the resulting compound's ability to infiltrate ventilation systems and create persistent contamination that was nearly impossible to remove. Owen had included growth rates, optimal temperature ranges, and the truly disturbing note that once established, the fungal colony becomes self-sustaining and can remain viable for years. He'd drawn diagrams, little sketches of spore distribution patterns, growth timelines, and infection vectors. They were surprisingly artistic, which somehow made them more disturbing. Instructor Ralmoth's hands were now gripping Owen's desk with enough force that the metal was creaking. His breathing slits were working overtime, his translator occasionally spitting out fragments in his native language that definitely weren't classroom appropriate. Method 14. Environmental weaponization through controlled avalanche or geological instability. For positions located in mountainous or geologically active regions, Owen had written, with the casual tone of someone describing a recipe for pasta salad, sustained low-frequency vibrations or strategic explosive placement can trigger natural disasters that neutralize the position without direct engagement. He'd included topographical requirements, seismic analysis basics, and even calculated optimal trigger points based on common fortification placement strategies. Apparently, Owen had minored in geology at some point, or possibly he'd just watched a lot of documentaries while eating cereal. Method 15 was where things got psychological in the worst way possible. Combined sleep deprivation and auditory-induced hallucination protocol. The detailed breakdown that followed was, in a word, sadistic. Owen had researched the neurological impact of sustained sleep deprivation across multiple species, identified common hallucination triggers, and designed an audio program that would exploit those triggers while preventing any possibility of rest. Typical effectiveness timeline, he'd noted, ranges from 60 hours for species with high metabolic rates to 200 hours for species with redundant neurological systems. Result: complete psychological breakdown and position abandonment without physical casualties. Equipment required: speakers, audio generation software, and patience. The fact that Owen had labeled this method as producing no physical casualties while describing something that would essentially break minds suggested a very particular definition of humane. Instructor Ralmoth turned away from Owen's desk, stumbled slightly, and braced himself against Silandra's desk. The massive reptilian warrior actually looked concerned, her clawed hand hovering near the instructor like she was considering whether to catch him if he fell. "Instructor," she ventured, her voice unusually hesitant, "are you functional?" Ralmoth's mandibles clicked weakly. "The human," he whispered, "is on method 15. "Yes?" Silandra prompted, clearly not seeing the problem yet. The question asked for 3. Understanding dawned across her reptilian features like a very slow, very horrifying sunrise. The classroom had descended into that special kind of silence that happens when everyone simultaneously realizes they're witnessing something historic. Historic terrible, but historic nonetheless. Other cadets were pulling up Owen's work on their own screens, the Academy's network allowing peer review of exam answers. The reactions were universal and immediate. A Plorathian cadet's containment field flickered as its gelatinous form rippled with distress. A Corvidian avian species representative had all their feathers standing on end, the biological equivalent of full-body horror. Even the typically stoic Morgathi cadets were exchanging glances that suggested they were reassessing their entire understanding of acceptable tactical planning. Owen's stylus continued its steady rhythm. Click, click, click against the data pad. The sound had taken on an ominous quality, like a timer counting down to some inevitable catastrophe. Method 16 appeared on the screen. Nanoscale mechanical sabotage through microscopic machine deployment. Instructor Ralmoth's eyes, all of them, went unfocused. His exoskeleton lost its remaining color, fading to an almost translucent pale. His breathing slits were barely moving. Instructor? Noforel's tentacles had formed what was, for his species, an expression of genuine concern. Your vital signs are entering critical ranges. Should I summon medical assistance? Ralmoth waved one hand weakly, a gesture that could have meant no, or possibly, let me die in peace. Owen, finally noticing the commotion, looked up from his data pad. His expression was one of mild confusion, like someone who'd just realized they'd been talking to themselves in public. "Oh," he said, glancing around at the sea of horrified faces. "Did you need these submitted already? I can finish up later if we're short on time." "How?" Ralmoth's voice came out strangled, distorted through his translator. "How many methods have you listed?" Owen checked his screen, scrolling up with the casual gesture of someone checking a shopping list. 15 so far. Well, 16. But I'm still working on the details for that one. Why?" The question, Ralmoth enunciated each word like it physically pained him, asked for 3. "Right. Yeah, I saw that." Owen nodded agreeably. "But I figured you probably wanted options, you know? Different scenarios call for different approaches. Like, Method 3 works great if you've got good intel on supply routes. But if you're dealing with an underground facility, you'd want something more like Method 9 or 14. It's all about flexibility." The instructor's mandibles opened and closed silently. "Plus," Owen continued, warming to his topic with the enthusiasm of someone finally getting to discuss their special interest, "some of these are pretty situation-specific. Method 8 only works if you've got local fauna to work with. Method 12 requires a certain tech level in the target position. Method 15 is really more of a last resort when you want minimal casualties but maximum effectiveness." Minimal casualties. The human thought method 15 was about minimizing casualties. "So anyway," Owen gestured at his screen, "I'm maybe about halfway through my initial brainstorming. I've got a few more conventional options to list, and then I was going to get into some of the really interesting possibilities. You know, the ones that require more prep time but have really spectacular success rates." Halfway, through, initial, brainstorming. Instructor Ralmoth's legs, all 6 of them, wobbled. His compound eyes rolled back slightly. Somewhere in his brain, the part that had survived 18 combat deployments and thought it had seen everything decided it was done for the day. "The really dark options," Owen added helpfully, "I was saving for extra credit. You know, in case you wanted to see the full range of possibilities. Should I keep those separate, or just add them to the main list?" That did it. Instructor Ralmoth, decorated veteran, survivor of the Siege of Carthax 9, winner of the Crimson Star of Valor, Instructor at the most prestigious military academy in known space, looked at Owen's earnest, slightly sleepy expression, processed the phrase "really dark options," calculated what could possibly be darker than fungal warfare and psychological torture, and made the executive decision that consciousness was overrated. His legs buckled. All 6 arms went limp. His compound eyes glazed over with the particular sheen that indicated a complete system shutdown. He didn't quite faint, not technically. The medical report would later describe it as acute psychological distress leading to temporary neurological overload. But for all practical purposes, Instructor Ralmoth checked out of reality, his exoskeleton hitting the floor with a resounding clang that echoed through the suddenly very, very quiet classroom. Owen blinked at the unconscious instructor, then looked around at his fellow cadets with genuine confusion. Was it something I said? Silandra's jaw hung open, displaying all of her impressive teeth. Nofril's tentacles had gone completely still, a biological impossibility that suggested his entire nervous system was rebooting. Grombash had stopped mid-breath, his stone-gray face locked in an expression that could have been carved from actual stone. From somewhere in the back of the classroom, a small, shocked voice spoke up. "He is only halfway done." And Owen, bless his oblivious human heart, smiled slightly and turned back to his datapad. "Yeah, I should probably finish up. Does anyone know if the instructor is going to be okay? Should I get the nurse, or—" His stylus resumed clicking. Method 16 wasn't going to write itself, after all. The galaxy, collectively, had just realized something terrifying. Humans weren't dangerous because they were strong, or fast, or naturally armed. Humans were dangerous because somewhere in their evolutionary history, they'd decided that "how do we destroy this" was a valid form of problem-solving, and they'd gotten very, very good at it. Method 16 was just the beginning. The medical team arrived within minutes, loaded Ralmoth onto a hovering stretcher, and administered heavy sedatives. One medic glanced at Owen's datapad, went pale, and quietly suggested the exam be postponed. Owen raised his hand. "I'm almost done, though. Can I just finish?" The medic fled, which is how Dean Cormathos got the call. Dean Cormathos was ancient even by Quellan standards. His tentacles had faded to dignified lavender gray, and his eye stalks moved with careful deliberation. He arrived at classroom 12C to find Ralmoth being wheeled out, mumbling about biological warfare. The remaining cadets sat frozen in shock, and Owen sat at his desk, stylus moving with steady purpose, apparently unaware he'd caused an institutional crisis. "Cadet Owen?" The dean's voice carried quiet authority. "Explain." Silandra simply pointed at Owen, her clawed hand trembling slightly. The dean extended one tentacle. "May I see your answer?" "Sure." Owen handed over his datapad without hesitation. Dean Cormathos began reading, his eye stalks tracking each line with methodical precision. "Method 16, he read aloud, "nanoscale mechanical sabotage through microscopic self-replicating machines." Owen had included molecular diagrams. The machines would infiltrate infrastructure and dismantle it from within, powered by ambient electromagnetic radiation. The dean scrolled faster, his horror mounting with each entry. Method 18, weather manipulation causing years of regional climate disruption. Method 19, economic warfare through market manipulation, no weapons required. Method 20, multi-generational cultural subversion, timeline measured in decades. Method 21, artificial intelligence corruption. Owen had created flowcharts for turning defensive AI systems against their operators. Method 22 involved orbital mechanics, weaponizing satellites. Method 23 described linguistic viruses that spread through communication like diseases, corrupting thought patterns. Method 24 detailed earthquake induction. Method 25, the dean's voice went quiet, time-delayed genetic targeting. The description that followed was blessedly vague, but the implications were clear enough. Owen had considered warfare on a timeline measured in generations, using genetic drift and carefully introduced mutations to create vulnerabilities that wouldn't manifest until long after the initial deployment. This method, Owen had noted, is included purely for theoretical completeness. Practical application would violate every ethical standard humanity has developed, most interstellar laws, and basic decency. Do not actually use this one. The fact that he'd included it at all, even with a "please don't actually do this" disclaimer, said something profound about human strategic thinking. Dean Cormathos lowered the datapad, all 6I, stalks focusing on Owen with an intensity that could have cut through Durasteel. Cadet Owen, you've listed 25 distinct methods for neutralizing a fortified position. Yes, sir. Well, 26, but I haven't finished 16 yet. The question asked for 3. Right, but I figured variety was important. Different situations call for different approaches, and— Where? The dean interrupted, his ancient voice carrying a weight that made everyone in the room lean back involuntarily. Did you learn these techniques? Owen blinked, confused by the question. Learn them? I didn't really learn them anywhere specific, sir. Some of it's stuff from history classes, some from engineering school, some from growing up on a farm, some from documentaries. I just, thought about the problem and wrote down solutions. The silence that followed could have been used as radiation shielding. You invented these methods? Dean Cormathos asked carefully. Well, no, not really. I mean, humans have used most of them at some point. I'm just adapting them to the scenario. Like, Method 8 is basically what locusts do, just weaponized. Method 11 is standard revolution tactics. Method 19 is how economic sanctions work. It's all pretty standard stuff if you think about it. Standard. The human thought multi-generational genetic warfare was standard stuff. Dean Cormathos was silent for a long moment. His tentacles curled in what might have been the Quellan equivalent of pinching the bridge of one's nose. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying a resignation that suggested he'd just had several of his assumptions about the universe fundamentally challenged. Cadet Owen, I'm going to access the Human Historical Database. I want you to wait here. Sure, no problem. Should I finish my answer while I wait? Every eye stalk, and sensory organ in the room swiveled to stare at Owen with expressions ranging from horror to morbid fascination. Please don't, Dean Cormathos said with feeling. He moved to the classroom's main terminal, his tentacles dancing across the holographic interface with practiced efficiency. The display flickered to life, showing the Human Historical Database, a comprehensive collection of Earth's recorded history that humanity had provided when joining the galactic community. The dean began cross-referencing Owen's methods with human historical conflicts. What he found made his skin change to a shade of purple that Quellans usually only achieved when facing imminent death. Method 1. Flanking maneuvers, used in approximately 6,000 documented human conflicts. Method 2. Supply line interdiction, 4,000 conflicts. Method 3. Psychological warfare, 8,000 conflicts. The numbers kept climbing. Each method Owen had listed, every single one, had precedent in human history. Some had been used dozens of times, some hundreds. The genetic targeting one, thankfully, remained theoretical, but the fact That humans had thought about it enough to develop ethical frameworks specifically prohibiting it was somehow worse. "They've actually done all of these," Dean Cormathos said, more to himself than anyone else. "Not theoretically, not as academic exercises. They've actually deployed these tactics in real conflicts." Silandra's claws scraped against her desk, the sound making several cadets jump. "All of them?" Her voice carried a tremor that the 3-meter reptilian warrior would probably deny later. "Not Method 25, apparently," the dean replied, scrolling through the database. "But only because they specifically created international laws prohibiting it. Which implies they thought about it enough to need laws." Noforel's tentacles were moving in rapid calculation patterns. "Probability assessment. If humans have historical precedent for 24 of 25 listed methods, and the cadet claims to be approximately halfway through his analysis." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Somewhere in the classroom, someone made a sound like a small animal realizing it was, in fact, on the menu. Dean Cormathos turned back to Owen, who had, despite instructions, continued writing. The human looked up, noticed the attention, and smiled slightly. "Sorry, I know you said not to finish, but I had a really good idea for Method 29, and I didn't want to forget it. It involves using solar radiation and magnetic field manipulation to—" "Stop," the dean held up a tentacle. "Please, just stop." Owen stopped, stylus hovering over his datapad, the picture of innocent compliance. Dean Cormathos looked at the unconscious instructor Ralmoth, then at Owen's partially completed answer, then at the horrified faces of the galaxy's supposed best and brightest warrior cadets, and made a decision that would reshape the Academy's entire curriculum. "Cadet Owen," he said slowly, "I'm going to need you to come with me. We need to have a very long conversation about human strategic thinking." "Am I in trouble?" "No," the dean replied, and he sounded tired in a way that transcended species. "No, you're not in trouble. But I think, perhaps, the rest of the galaxy might be." Owen stood, gathering his datapad, still looking confused about what the fuss was about. As he walked toward the door with Dean Cormathos, he paused and looked back at his fellow cadets. "Oh, hey, if anyone wants to study together later, I've got notes on all this stuff. Happy to share." The offer was met with the kind of silence usually reserved for funeral services. As the door closed behind Owen and the dean, the classroom remained frozen. Dozens of cadets from dozens of species, all having the same simultaneous revelation. Humans weren't impressive because they were strong. They weren't dangerous because they were aggressive. They weren't terrifying because they were warlike. Humans were all of those things because they'd spent their entire evolutionary history fighting each other, and they'd gotten very, very creative about it. And Owen, sleepy, average, perpetually tired Owen, represented a species that considered multi-vector strategic annihilation to be pretty standard stuff. In the corner, Instructor Ralmoth twitched slightly, consciousness beginning to return. The medics exchanged glances, then simultaneously decided he was better off staying unconscious for a while longer. Some revelations, after all, were better processed gradually, preferably with significant psychological support. The emergency faculty meeting convened within the hour, which was impressive considering it normally took the Academy administration 3 weeks to schedule a lunch. Dean Cormathos stood at the head of the conference table, Owen's exam displayed on the main holographic screen like evidence at a war crimes tribunal. Around the table sat the Academy's senior staff, representatives from a dozen different species, all wearing variations of the same expression: profound existential concern. "Gentlemen, ladies, and assorted sentient beings," the dean began, "we have a situation." Situation, rumbled General Thokmar, a Morgathi with more scars than skin, is a diplomatic word. What we have is a human who wrote a terrorist manual disguised as homework. The question asked for 3 methods, added Commander Wilsha, her Silthar scales rippling with agitation. 3! The human provided 25, with footnotes and an appendix. Actually, Dean Cormithos corrected mildly, he provided 25 because we stopped him. His notes indicate he was planning for 30, with what he described as comprehensive integration frameworks for combined deployment. The silence that followed could have smothered stars. Dr. Fenrock, head of xenopsychology, leaned forward with 6 of his insectoid limbs. The real question is, should we be concerned about Cadet Owen specifically, or about humans generally? That, the Dean said, is what we're here to determine. He pulled up Owen's academic record. Unremarkable grades, solid but not exceptional. No disciplinary issues. Performance reviews from instructors described him as attentive enough, follows instructions adequately, and seems perpetually sleepy, but gets the work done. He's average, Wilsha said flatly. By human standards, he's completely average. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I took the liberty, Dean Cormathus continued, of accessing the other human cadets' exam responses to question 12. The holographic display shifted, showing answer after answer. Every single human cadet had written more than 3 methods. The lowest count was 8. The highest was 32. By all the stars, whispered Thokmar. They weren't showing off, the Dean said quietly. Review the response patterns. They genuinely thought we wanted comprehensive options. To them, this is normal problem solving. List all possible solutions. Evaluate based on context. Select optimal approach. Dr. Fenrock's mandibles clicked rapidly, his species equivalent of nervous laughter. They've spent their entire evolutionary history fighting each other. 10,000 years of continuous warfare. And they remembered everything. Every trick, every tactic, every method of destruction. And now they're in space, Wilsha added, her voice hollow, with the rest of us. The meeting stretched into its 3rd hour, cycling through options. Expel the humans? Politically impossible and potentially insulting to a species that, despite everything, had been peaceful since joining the Galactic community. Restrict their tactical education? That felt like discrimination. Pretend this never happened? Too late, Ralmoth's medical report was already in the system. Finally, Dean Cormithos made a decision. We adapt our curriculum. Human strategic thinking becomes mandatory coursework for all cadets. Not to teach these methods, but to teach how to defend against them. And perhaps more importantly, to understand the mindset that creates them. You want to learn from this? Thokmar sounded incredulous. I want to survive this, the Dean corrected. The humans are here, they're staying, and pretending they're not tactical geniuses with disturbing historical precedent won't change reality. Meanwhile, in his quarters, Owen was reviewing his submitted exam, finally realizing why everyone had reacted so strongly. Oh, he said to his empty room, they really did just want 3 methods. He pulled up a new document and started typing. Supplementary note to Dean Cormithos. Upon reflection, I realize my response to question 12 may have exceeded requirements. For future reference, if you need only 3 methods, I recommend methods 2, 9, and 11 as optimal for most standard scenarios. The remaining 22 methods should be considered situational alternatives or theoretical exercises. Method 31, which I didn't include, would have been negotiate peaceful resolution, using credible threat of methods. 1 to 30 as diplomatic leverage. Sometimes the best way to win is not to fight at all. Respectfully, Cadet Owen. The next morning, Owen arrived at the dean's office as requested. He expected reprimand, possibly expulsion. Instead, Dean Cormathos looked at him with all 6 eye stalks and said, "Cadet Owen, how would you feel about assisting with curriculum development?" "Sir, your supplementary note mentioned Method 31, negotiation backed by comprehensive threat assessment." The dean's tentacles formed what might have been a smile. "That, cadet, is perhaps the most human thing you've written. The wisdom to know when not to use the weapons you've spent so much time learning to make." Owen blinked. "So, I passed?" "You passed." The dean handed back his datapad, now stamped with a grade that simply read, "Pass with extreme prejudice." You also terrified an instructor into medical leave, caused an emergency faculty meeting, and forced us to restructure our entire tactical curriculum. Sorry? Don't be. You've taught us something valuable. Cormathos's eye stalks focused intently. Humans aren't dangerous because you're violent. You're dangerous because you understand violence so completely that you've learned when not to use it. That's a lesson worth teaching. 6 months later, the Galactic Combat Academy introduced its most popular elective, Human Tactical Theory. Instructor Ralmoth, recovered and only slightly traumatized, co-taught it with Owen. The syllabus included one critical rule, printed at the top of every assignment. Unless specifically instructed otherwise, please limit responses to the requested number of examples. We trust you have more. We don't need to know them all. In the margins of his teaching notes, Owen had written one final observation. Method 31. Know enough ways to destroy something that you never have to. That's not just tactics. That's civilization. And somewhere in the Galactic database, filed under Incidents that Changed Military Education Forever, sat Question 12 and Owen's answer, preserved as both warning and wisdom. The galaxy had asked for 3 ways to kill. A human had given them 30. But the real lesson was in the method he never wrote, the one that lived in the space between knowing how and choosing not to. The most powerful weapon of all. Restraint born from comprehensive understanding. That, perhaps, was the most terrifying and hopeful thing about humanity. They'd figured out every possible way to destroy each other, and then they'd decided, mostly, not to. Emphasis on mostly.